Hello. Yeah, so I was looking at the options for the surprise quiz. So one of the things we can do is the surprise quiz can continue to have multiple choice questions, which which might be like a simple one word answer, that kind of thing. And those questions that require you to solve a few steps and so on, you can do it on a piece of paper, take a screenshot, and then upload it in inside the Google form. So there's an option to allow you to upload a file. Okay, but you can't upload like multiple files. You can only upload one file. So it'll be a small computation, preferably on a small piece of paper, or half a page maybe, that you can take a photo of and then just upload. So that's one way of taking care of this. But the disadvantage there is that I have to if it takes you 5 to 7 minutes to solve the problem, then I have to give you 5-10 more, or depending on different people's camera and all that, I have to give you at least some more time for you to upload that file. So the duration of the quiz might increase from let's say 10 minutes to 15 minutes, and I don't want to necessarily do that during class hours. So I'm thinking that we fix a time, right? We fix a time, which is so Tuesdays afternoons we're supposed to have a class from 2 to 3, correct? The fourth lecture hour. Nischal, can you confirm that? It's on Tuesdays,
Yes,
right?
yes, sir.
Yeah. So maybe we can come to an agreement that I will send out a surprise quiz on any given Tuesday. I'm not going to fix it right now. At 2 o'clock, exactly at 2 o'clock, you'll receive the email. You have to open the link. You'll have up to maybe 2:15 or 2:20, whatever it may be, for you to solve it, scan it, and then upload it. Okay, so I'll not tell you which Tuesday it will be. It can be any Tuesday, but you have to be ready at 2 o'clock on a given Tuesday. Does that seem like a reasonable thing to do? Because anyway, it's our scheduled class timing. So we also get to use more of our class hours instead of spending 10-15 minutes on our time on the surprise quiz. We can do it on the Tuesday at 2 o'clock, which is anyway our class time. But which Tuesday you will not know. So every Tuesday you have to be ready. You have to assume that you may get an email on any given Tuesday. Does that seem okay? I need to hear your opinions. Same old thing, yeah. You guys have to open your mouth. Just say yes or no. No, it's not all that difficult. You think it's a terrible idea, you just say it's a terrible idea.
No, sir.
No means what? It's not a terrible idea.
Let's go like this only, sir. You conducted last time, no? That was fine.
Well, see, the reason I don't want to do that is, see, I gave 2 questions, and one was, a multiple choice answer where you have to just click the correct answer, and it's for 5 marks, right? So it's a little unfair. Even if you did all the steps correctly or whatever, and suppose you're not able to get the right numerical answer, you get a 0. I don't want to do that. That's not fair. Okay, I just want to make sure that
Sir, we will upload instantly.
No,
Like
instantly is fine. Is this Tuesday 2 o'clock idea? Is it okay?
no, sir. Surprise means we should be surprised, na? So
See,
don't
now
schedule.
the thing is this. Okay, look, we are in a circumstance which is not like the usual situation, right? It's a slightly unusual situation. The surprise is that it can be any Tuesday. I'll not tell you which Tuesday it will be, right? So to that extent, it's a surprise. See, what is the objective of a surprise quiz? To ensure that you are continuously preparing, right? So that you're not thinking, I'll take care of it at the end. I want
Yes,
you to
sir.
take.
That idea is fine.
It's okay, na? I mean, I thought it was a decent idea. Okay, so if you don't speak up now, it's assumed that you're okay with the idea. Okay, all right. Okay, so that's what we are going to do.
What's the idea?
Oh, so you came late. Sorry. So the idea is this: we will we will have the surprise quiz on any Tuesday. I will not tell you which Tuesday. On any given Tuesday, exactly at 2 o'clock, 2 to 3 is supposed to be our class timing, which which we are not making use of that lecture, right? So on any given Tuesday at 2 o'clock, you will receive an email saying the surprise quiz starts. Okay, so you have to be online and checking your email. Okay, and then I'll give you 15-20 minutes, whatever it may be. If it involves a small computation, you will do it on a piece of paper, take a photo of it, and Google Forms allows you to upload a file. I'll set it up such that you can upload a file into Google Forms. Okay, so you will upload it and then submit it. All right, so because usually my surprise quizzes are 10 minutes, because there's this additional work that you have to do, you have to take a photo, you have to upload it and all that, I may give 5 more minutes. Let's say it's a 15-minute quiz, and it will open at 2, it will close at 2:15. If you try at 2:16, it's not going to work. Okay, so I'm saying this is the way we will do it. There's multiple advantages. Number one, you will, if it's a problem where you have to show the steps, you will get credit for the steps, so it's good in that sense. It also doesn't take away our class hours, which anyways we have already limited it from 4 to 3, and the rest of it we are doing self-study or whatever. So in that sense, also it's an advantage. Okay, so from now on, all the surprise quizzes will be in this format. So that's the idea. And if you are in agreement, let's move ahead. Okay, so all right. So last class we were discussing about these what are they? The Thyssen polygon method. Okay, so maybe quickly I'll just go over. Right. So the objective that we were interested in was in trying to come up with the mean precipitation over an area, the average over an area. Okay, because whenever you make a measurement, it is happening over at a particular point. It may not represent the entire area, right? So if I have multiple rain gauges within a given area, and I'm interested in trying to find out what is the mean or the average precipitation that area has received, which is often required, there are many different ways of doing it. The simplest way, the most direct way, is to take an arithmetic mean. Okay, this is the simplest one. There's nothing much to explain. If you have 5 gauges inside the area, so let's just draw it over here. Okay, so if I have gauge 1, gauge 2, gauge 3, gauge 4, gauge 5, something like this, all over distributed over your watershed, you just take the individual rainfalls received at all of these 5 gauges, n gauges, whatever it may be, and take the average of that arithmetic mean, and say this is the average rainfall received by the catchment or the watershed. Okay, so that is the simplest method. The next method is what is called the Thyssen polygon method, and that's what we were trying to understand in the previous class. Okay, so we were trying to understand that through an example. Okay, so now I tried to draw it by hand. It got a little bit messy, but let's try to understand what the procedure is. Okay, so the procedure is fairly straightforward. Okay, so you have these circles, these black circles that you see, those are the locations of the rainfall gauges. And what I do to begin with is to draw triangles connecting these different points. Okay, so once I draw these triangles, then I draw perpendicular bisectors for each of the sides of the triangles. Okay, so these dotted red lines that you see are perpendicular bisectors for the different sides of the triangle, right? So wherever these perpendicular bisectors intersect, that point becomes what we call the vertex of a polygon, which is what is the Thyssen polygon, right? So for instance, take location 2, the rain gauge 2, for example. So in this triangle 1, 2, 5, these are the, maybe I'll denote some names over here. Okay. So let's say this is point A. Let's say this is point A. A, B, C, and so on. Okay. So these are all the points at which these perpendicular bisectors intersect. Okay, and therefore these are representing these polygons are representing areas which are nearest to a given given station. So for example, if you take this polygon, okay, of course, okay, any point inside this polygon, the closest rain gauge is number 2. Do you agree? Does everybody agree with that? Any point inside this polygon, the closest rainfall gauge for any point inside this polygon is rainfall gauge number 2, right? Because the sides of the triangle, we are drawing the perpendicular bisector. So it is bisecting this line 1, 2 into half. So any point on this side of this line will be closer to rain gauge number 1, and any point on the other side of the line will be closer to rain gauge number 2. Similar thing we have drawn for all the triangles, and so we end up getting a that polygon is representing the area such that any point within that area is closest to location number 2 or rain gauge number 2. Similarly, we have other polygons for each of these rain gauges. Is that concept okay? Does everybody understand that? Why are we interested in this area? We are saying this rainfall gauge number 2 is representative of this area. Whatever that area that has been drawn there is representative of this area. Similarly, polygon, the other polygon, maybe this polygon over here. Okay, sorry. Assume that I've drawn it correctly. Okay. Okay, you know what I mean. Okay, so this polygon over here, assume that it is representative of this rainfall gauge 3 and so on. What are we interested in trying to find out the mean precipitation over this circular catchment area. Okay, so then I know that corresponding to rainfall gauge 2, this is the area that is representative of rainfall gauge 2. This is the area for 4 and 3 and 5 and so on, and then I take the summation of all of that, right? So P bar equal to P1 A1 plus P2 A2 plus P3 A3 and so on, divided by A1 plus A2 plus A3. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I'll just go through the solution of the problem. So this is what the so these are the actual polygons that are drawn. Okay. So what I did might not have been exactly accurate because the perpendicular bisectors, I just did them approximately. But when you do it pakka, then these are the polygons that you get. So these are the points that you see, A, B, C, D, E, and so on, right? So station number 1, which is outside the catchment, okay? And incidentally, the way it is done, the station number 1 does not contribute anything to this catchment area. But you require that station number 1 in order to draw the polygons, right? All right. Okay, so then you come up with these boundaries of these polygons A, B, C, D, which has an area of, okay, so A, B, C, D is somewhere from here, A, B, C, D. So this polygon has an area of 2000 whatever. This you can obtain by, graphical methods or whatever it is. All right, and what is this fraction? What does this fraction mean? Can anybody tell me what this fraction means?
Total area circle divided by the partial, that area.
Right. So this area that A, B, C, D covers is 2141. If you take that as a ratio of the total area of the circle, that ratio comes to 0.2726, right? So it covers about 27% of the area of the circle. And the rainfall received at location 2 is 135.2. So the area weighted number would be 135.2 into 0.2726. That gives you this number 36.86. Okay, similarly, you do it for station 3, station 4, and station 5, and you get all of these different numbers. All right, so 36, 19, 39, 25. You sum them all up, that gives you 121.84. which is the average rainfall received in this, of course, the units 121.84 centimeters. Okay, so that is it's a fairly straightforward methodology. The only thing is that you have come up with this approach of dividing your area into different polygons based on the approach where you're dividing up your area into triangles and then subsequently polygons, which are representing the nearest neighbor. Okay, so this method, in addition to being called the Theisen polygon method, is also, there's one more name, Thiessen. Theisen is the name of the person who came up with this Theisen polygon method. It's also called nearest neighbor method. Nearest neighbor method. Okay, nearest neighbor because the area within that polygon corresponds to the nearest the nearest neighbor for the rainfall data. Okay, this can be nearest neighbor is it's a general method. We are using it for what is this, for rainfall. It could also be any other attribute, right? We are just using it for rainfall. It could be something, it could be temperature, it could be what is the average temperature over this area. You could use the Theisen polygon method. I'm not saying it's being used, but it can be used. Okay, you could use it for any other attribute as well, right? Okay. Now the third method for estimating the average rainfall over an area is what is called the isoheital method. Okay, so now does everybody remember what isoheight means? We discussed this last time. What is an isoheight?
Areas with same amount of rainfall.
No.
Lines connecting areas.
No, not areas. Lines collecting points which receive equal amount of rainfall is an isoheight. Okay, so let's just go over that. Isoheight is basically a line joining points of equal rainfall magnitude. Okay, so you know isobar. Isobar is a line that joins points which have equal pressure, for example. So you've done surveying, right? Have you done surveying?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So in surveying, you developed contours. What is a contour?
Lines joining equal elevations.
Right. A contour is basic. A head contour or a elevation contour. You can create contours for anything. In surveying, in the context of surveying, when you create a contour, what you are saying is that all points on this line, on this contour line, are having equal elevation, right? So that is what an elevation contour is, right? Similarly, an isoheight is a line that is joining points of equal rainfall magnitude. Okay, so let us just look at an example. So let us say I have this solid line that you see, that is the catchment boundary. Okay, and I have different gauges. You see these points A, B, C, D, E, F, and so on. All of these points receive rainfall during imagine a storm. Okay, and they receive different amounts of rainfall. So A receives 7.2 centimeters of rainfall, B receives 7 centimeters, C receives 9.2, whatever it is, right? So all of them receive all of these different amounts of rainfall. Using this information, you can interpolate and create these contours and say, okay, so all points along this line will receive about 4 centimeters of rainfall. This line corresponds to 6 centimeters of rainfall. This line corresponds to 8 centimeters of rainfall. This line corresponds to 10 centimeters of rainfall, and so on. Okay, so this is of course, this requires a lot of understanding of the processes that drive rainfall. So developing isoheights is not an easy task. Okay, you need to know how elevation varies, because elevation also determines how rainfall gets distributed. You need to know in which direction the storm came. Did the storm come from east to west, or did it go from west to east, or north to south, or whatever it is? All of that determines what kind of rainfall distribution you get. So developing these isoheights is not necessarily an easy task. Okay, it requires maybe prior information about what happened in previous storms. Okay, a lot of information goes into developing these isoheights. Okay, so let us assume that we know the isoheights for a given area. We are able to develop these isoheights. Okay, then using these isoheights, can I find out what the average rainfall over this area was? If I asked you to find out, given these ISO heights, the average rainfall over this area, how would you do it? What would you do? Anybody? Look at this area that you're seeing over here. I know the ISO heights, okay, and I'm interested in trying to find out what the average rainfall over this catchment is. What would I do? How would I go about it? Think of a simple way of doing it.
Well, function, you create a function, sir, along the orthogonal to iso height,
You create a function orthogonal to ISO heights. Okay.
so that you can then you'll have a graph. You'll have a graph along some along that line along orthogonally. You will have some graph. Through that you can average.
Orthogonal, I don't understand what orthogonal has to do with this.
No, see, for every isohedral, you see along each isohedral, you keep on. So suppose you take a line, sir. You keep on drawing this perpendicular to the each isohedral.
Okay.
So through that, I think you will get a function.
What function?
Function along that isohedral. How this how this is varying. How rainfall is varying
Okay,
along that isohedral.
Okay, I don't clearly understand what you're saying. Any other ideas? Anything simpler?
Similarly, we can find those areas in between each of the ISO heights.
Okay, and then
And same like average formula we have now.
okay, so let's see if we can agree on this. Okay, so let us look at these ISO height corresponding to 8 and corresponding to 10. Okay, between them, this is the area between ISO height 8 corresponding to 8 centimeters of rainfall and 10 centimeters of rainfall. Okay, now can I say that this area that I've drawn, that the dashed area that I've drawn, that corresponds to an average rainfall of 9 centimeters? Would you agree with that?
No.
Huh? Why?
Yes, more or less.
Why no? Come on, you can't. Nobody can argue that.
Why
this
yes, sir?
Why yes? Because at one end of that area, you're receiving 8 centimeters of rainfall. At the other end, you're receiving 10 centimeters of rainfall. So that that area on average receives 9 centimeters of rainfall. What is the great proof that I have to give for this? I don't understand. I feel that this is fairly intuitive.
In between, you can have some, let's say, the 20, and it might have decreased 8 to 20 and 20 to 10. Possibilities are there.
Of course, it's
So-
possible. Of course, it's possible. It's also possible that if you install 3,000 more rainfall gauges in this entire area, you will get an even more accurate estimate, right? And then once you have all that money to do that, you do that. Okay. But right now, I don't have all that. I only have this. What do you do?
So, sir, you can't vaguely approximate, sir. I don't agree.
Come on. Look, learn to deal with this. We are engineers. Okay, engineers are not interested in accurate solutions, or what, let's say, or the the exact value. We are interested in approximate solutions, right? If you want to make a building that will never collapse ever, no such building can be made. But we all agree that, you know what, we'll make a building that can last for 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, whatever it is, and then we come to a compromise and then say this is the best we can do, right? So there's nothing in the world that will give you exact numbers, and we are not looking at this as a something. If you don't know the correct number, what is the risk of this? Then you can say, you know what, I have a number, but that number may not be exactly accurate. It may be right 80% of the time, 90% of the time. Don't expect 100% from me. We are engineers. Okay.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
So if the area is so large in between those two lines, then we like the average may be wrong, sir. Like
Of
not
course,
wrong.
it may be wrong. Of course, it may be wrong. See, that this is what I'll keep reiterating this again and again. Okay. Now, remember that as an engineer, okay, as an engineer, our job is to be able to come up with an estimate to the best of the information that is available to us. Don't say, oh, I would like it if I had more information about what is happening in between. Of course, I would like it if there was something more, some more information is available. That is always true. You set up 100 gauges, and then I'll still draw I'll draw more detailed ISO heights, and then between those two ISO heights, and I'll again interpolate. Okay, let us say instead of A, B, C, D, E, F, there are 6 gauges, right? Let us say there are 60 gauges here. Okay, and then I draw more ISO heights. Instead of drawing 10 and then 12, I will draw, let us say, I will draw 10.4, 10.8, whatever it is. I'm just exaggerating. Okay, I draw more detailed ISO heights with more data. Okay, let us say I draw all this. Then between these two, what will you do? You will just say this over this area. Let's take the rainfall as the average of these two ISO heights. That's what you'll do, right? You'll have more confidence. I agree with you. You'll have more confidence when you have finely spaced ISO heights. You will have more confidence, of course. I'm not disagreeing with that. But the fact of the matter is, as an engineer, our job is not always look for the truth, to look for the approximate thing that will get us ahead. We can't be waiting for, oh, I will never build the building because I don't have confidence that it will never fall. You have to build it. See, this is something, this philosophy you will have to appreciate and understand as an engineer, that we are not interested in absolutes. We are interested in approximations. And the cleverer your approximation is, the better engineer you will be. The more practical situations that your approximation can handle, the better an engineer you are. Okay. The quest for making it better will continue always. You will always try to make it better and better and better. But given data, you will do the best you can with that data. You will not insist that unless you give me perfect data, I cannot do anything. I'll just sit here and wait for perfect data. You have to sit for ever, because you'll never get perfect data. It's not like a science experiment in the lab where you have the luxury of doing it for eternity. Here you need pragmatic solutions. You need approximate answers so that you can do something and move on. And then when you learn more information, you correct yourself. Who is saying this is pakka? We are saying we will do what we can with this. Okay. All right. I've spoken enough. So yeah. So to compute the average precipitation, you use the inter-ISO height areas. So between these ISO heights, there's an area, right? You use that area. You compute that area either graphically or whatever method, and then you compute the average P bar equal to A1, which is the area between, let us say, two ISO heights, multiplied by P1 plus P2 by 2, plus A2 into P2 plus P3 by 2, plus so on and so forth, AN minus 1 into PN minus 1 plus PN by 2, divided by, that's the area weighted precipitation, and then because you have to divide it by the total area. So then you're able to get the average precipitation over this entire area. Is that okay? Nobody raised this question when I spoke about the isoheital method. How do you know that in between those two things something is not changing? It's the same thing here also. For isoheights, everybody kept quiet when I do the polygons and then took the average. How do we know that between the two stations something drastic is not happening? We are saying those polygons are representing, right? In the previous example, you're saying these polygons represent rainfall occurring at station 2. How do you know? We don't know. What is the solution? Install more gauges. Of course, to get the budget approved and to do it, it may take 5 years. But until then, what do I do? Right? To install more gauges, you need money. To get that money, you will have to go and talk to the government, and then the government has to approve it, this, that, then you buy it, and then Corona comes in between, and then everything gets stopped. So by the time you install it, it's 10 years. So until 10 years, you will not live your life, huh? You have to do something, nah? That's the thing. Okay. So this is the way engineers work. Okay. By the end of your engineering, you must all be comfortable with this, with the understanding that we are not providing 100% answers. We are providing approximate answers. In some cases, you may even have to give a 50% answer or a 60% answer. Okay, and then say that it is not a 100% answer. It is a 50% answer. If there's a 50% chance of your answer being wrong, you should say it. If there's a 70% or a 30% chance of your answer being wrong, you should say it. Right? We all deal with uncertainties, and we agree that we don't know some things, and we admit our the shortcomings, admit the disadvantages or the limitations. Nothing wrong. Nobody will accuse you of not giving the correct answer. You will say, I did the best I could. Okay. All right. So this is a philosophical question. This you have to deal with. All right. So there's a simple problem. We'll just quickly go through this. I'm not going to sit and explain the whole thing. Okay. So the isohyets due to a storm in a catchment are drawn. Okay. The same thing that I just showed earlier. And the area of the, yes. Purnachandar, you have a question?
No, sir. No.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And the area of the catchment bounded by the isohyets were tabulated as below, right? So I have an isohyet of 12 centimeters, which is right at the station. So this area is given 30 square kilometers. 12 to 10, between 12 and 10, the area is 140 square kilometers. Between 10 and 8 is 80. Between 8 and 6 is 180, and so on. Okay. The objective is to estimate the mean precipitation due to the storm. It's fairly straightforward. Okay. So you just take the area. So these are the, this column is the area for each of those average values, right? So between 12 and 10, the average value is 11. Between 10 and 8 centimeters, the average value is 9 centimeters, and so on, right? So you compute the averages, the average precipitations, multiplied by the areas, and then divide by the total area. Total area is 450 square kilometers. So you do this, you compute the fractions, and then you do the area weighted average. You get an area weighted average of mean precipitation of 8.84 centimeters. Okay. Although the rainfall ranged between 4 and 12, the average comes to somewhere 8.84 centimeters. Okay. All right. You can also very easily do, an arithmetic mean. Take the arithmetic mean of 4, 9.1, 7.2, 7, 9.2, and 12. So those are the rain gauges, right? An arithmetic mean of all of these numbers could also give you an answer. And then you can also compare it to how close it is to this 8.84. It may be close, it may not be close, depends on the situation, depends on the area, and so on. Right? But the arithmetic mean, of course, is a simple method. It doesn't require any sophistication. Whereas these approaches are a little bit more. There's a little bit more sophistication in these methods. Okay. So any questions on how to obtain average precipitation over an area? All right. Okay.
Sir,
Yes.
Sir, why do we need to, study the mean, analyze the mean of rainfall in a area? Apart from some agricultural uses, why do we need it?
Okay. So now let us say you're interested in, okay, so you brought in agriculture here. So let's take agriculture for example. Okay. So you may be aware that, in India, what is the situation in terms of water? Does everybody have access to water in India?
No.
Okay. And why do you think we don't have access to water in India?
Because not all the places are near water bodies.
Okay. So now you're from Bombay, right, Aditya?
No, sir, Bhopal.
Bhopal. Okay. I remember somebody. Okay. Anyway, let us take the example of Bombay, for instance. Okay. So now if you're in Bombay, and you're living in a in a house which has municipal water supply, more or less throughout the year you will get 24 hours water supply. Okay. How is it possible that when Bombay doesn't receive rain throughout the year, Bombay, the residents of Bombay, I'm saying Bombay, it could be any city. How is it possible that the residents of the city are able to get water 24/7, 365 days? How is that possible?
They would store water.
Huh. So the city makes some arrangements to store water such that you're able to use that water for the requirements when the rain is not happening. Right? Typically, you require it for the months of March, April, May, and so on. Right? June onwards, the rainfall starts to kick in. So even if you have even if you just store the rainwater that you receive, June to September, you will be fine. October onwards, you may get a little bit of rainfall and so on. But definitely in the months of March, April, and May, you require water, and for that you store water beforehand. Where do you store it? What is typically done in these big cities is that they have massive lakes that are available around the city, where these rainwater that is collected and stored and then treated and released throughout the year to supply water. But let us say you are living in a village 50 kilometers away from Mumbai. Okay. Now in that village, you do not get a similar kind of access to water. Okay. And why is that? Because there's no infrastructure. These massive lakes have not been built, or even if they have been built, most of that water gets used up for agriculture. Right? In India, 80% of the water is used for agriculture. You may not be aware of this. If you receive 100 units of water every year, 80% of that is used for agriculture. Only the remaining 20% is for drinking, domestic uses and industry and all that. Most of the water in the country is used for agriculture. Okay. So now agriculture also, different crops require different amounts of rainfall. Okay, this is a long answer to a short question. Okay, different crops require different amount of rainfall. Now, for example, paddy and sugarcane require like 1000 mm or 2400 mm of rainfall of water. Sorry. Okay, to grow 1 acre of paddy or sugarcane, you require about 1000 millimeters of water or 2000 millimeters of water depth. Okay, if you require this much amount of water, you don't necessarily get that amount of water from rainfall. Okay, depending on where you are growing it. So what you typically do is you rely on groundwater to supply the remaining portion of your water requirement by the crops. Okay, and if everybody starts growing, these kinds of crops, paddy and sugarcane and so on, you end up in a situation where the groundwater level drops terribly. So you may be aware that all over India, groundwater levels have declined dramatically. Okay, and this is putting a lot of pressure on the the aquifers which are underground. Okay, and therefore people are not able to access water. So maybe 30-40 years back, you could drill a well for maybe 30 feet, 40 feet, or maybe 100 feet and get water. But today, in some parts of the country, you have to drill 500 feet, 800 feet, 1000 feet, and so on. Okay. So therefore, the access to water is such a critical question. And it all depends on the crop that you grow. Now, if I want to decide to move away from growing certain crops that require a lot of water towards some other crops that require less water, for example. Okay. How would I decide which crop is suitable to a given area? How do we decide if this crop is suitable for this region? For example, if you take the region, let's say Northeast receives 2000 millimeters of rainfall every year. Okay, more than 2000 some places. If you want to grow sugarcane, that would probably be the right place to grow it, because it receives 2000 millimeters of rainfall, and sugarcane requires 2000 millimeters of water. Okay, but sugarcane is not grown in the Northeast majorly. Sugarcane is grown in Maharashtra. Sugarcane is grown in Andhra Pradesh. It's grown in Karnataka. It's grown in Tamil Nadu and in many states which don't receive that much rainfall. Okay, so if I know the average rainfall that this region receives, I can come to a decision whether or not you can grow this particular crop in this area. Right. So that is one application where you would need to know the average precipitation over an area. Okay, just one example. Now, You also have to decide. So let us say I want to build a dam in an area. Okay, I want to build a dam. The dam will, is going to serve a very large area. Okay, if I store water in a dam, I'll be able to maybe supply water to a city and maybe 50 or 100 villages nearby. Okay, to know the amount of water that the dam can store, I need to know how much water the catchment area of that dam receives, right? If I don't know how much water that catchment receives, how will I know how big the dam I should build? Should I build a dam of height 20 meters, or should I build a dam of height 40 meters? That depends on how much water I receive. If the region, if you want to build a dam, let us say in Rajasthan, you can't build a huge dam. That place receives such a small amount of rainfall. What is the point of building a big dam in Rajasthan when it doesn't receive any rainfall? But if you want to build a dam, on the Ganga or something like that, then you will have to build a relatively large dam, right? Because that region receives a lot of rainfall, which means there'll be a lot of runoff, which means you can store a lot of water. So you require a large dam. Okay. So there's n number of applications. I'm just giving you a couple, right? So a lot of the time you are interested in knowing what is the area, what is the average rainfall received over an area. Okay. All right. Anything else? Let's keep going. Let's keep going. I've got a lot of material to cover. Okay. So now even in in this aerial distribution of rainfall that we've spoken about, you can also look at it, try to come up with some kind of empirical equation that allows you to assess how rainfall is distributed over an area. Okay. So if I take a rainfall event of a given duration, okay, now this is very important. Rainfall event of a given duration. Okay. Let us say at a particular location, I'm receiving rainfall over an 8-hour duration. Okay. And I want to know what the average rainfall received in this area is over that 8 hours duration. I can come up with some kind of a simple expression, right? So P bar equal to P naught times e to the power minus K times A to the power N, where A is that area. Okay. So this P naught is the highest amount of rainfall at the storm center, right? The center of the storm receives the highest rainfall. Okay. So if I know, if I happen to have a rainfall gauge at the storm center, okay, it's unlikely, but just assume that if I have a storm a rainfall gauge that measures the highest rainfall in an area, you can assume that rainfall is that location is the storm center. Okay, so that is your P naught. P naught is the highest amount of rainfall that is received over that large area. Okay, so P naught, P bar, which is the average depth, okay, is simply P naught times e to the power minus K into A power N. This K and N are constants that can vary from region to region. If I try to find this out for South India, for the state of Andhra Pradesh, you may get a certain value of K and a certain value of N. If you go for another area, you may find a different value of N, right? So this is another way of establishing the average rainfall received over a given area of a storm of given duration. Okay, so these are just empirical studies. Okay, this is not based on any there's no analytical way of arriving at this expression. This is the understanding is that if I have, let us say I have an area, okay, which receives rainfall. Okay, let's say the storm comes from this direction, and at this location I receive the highest amount of rainfall. Okay, as I move away from this location, I'll receive lesser and lesser amount of rainfall, right? That everybody agrees. Is that consistent with your understanding? If this location that I marked as X, if that location receives the highest amount of rainfall, as I move away and away from that location, it will receive the rainfall received will be lesser and lesser, right?
Yes, sir.
And if I move sufficiently far away, you may receive no rainfall, right? So this kind of an expression allows you to come up with some kind of approximate empirical way of coming up with an understanding of the average distribution of rainfall over an area. Okay, again, the application is the same thing, but this is just another way of obtaining this information. Okay, now the other thing that we might be interested in when we are looking at looking at understanding a large area and looking at the depth of rainfall that that area receives is what is called a depth area duration curve. Okay, so let's quickly go through that. So let us say you want to understand what kind of severe floods can impact a certain area, right? So if you want to estimate the severe floods in a given region, you may be interested in what kind of rainfall is received in this region and what duration of that rainfall happens. Okay, in case you're hearing a lot of screaming in the background, those are my kids, so sorry. Okay, yeah, so if I have information for a long term about the amount of rainfall received and the duration of rainfall, okay, so suppose for example I receive 10 centimeters of rainfall in 3 hours, or I receive 10 centimeters of rainfall in 24 hours, which will cause more flooding in the same area?
24 hours.
Think carefully. I receive 10 centimeters of rainfall, 10 centimeters of rainfall, not intensity. 10 centimeters of rainfall in 24 hours and 10 centimeters of rainfall in 3 hours.
3 hours.
Yeah. So when you receive a lot of rainfall in a shorter duration, that creates more flooding, right? More likely to create more flooding, right? So we need to look at information. If you have long-term information, so over an area, you may have rainfall gauges at multiple locations, and all of these multiple locations will be collecting information, let us say for the last 30, 40, 50 years. If I have 50 years of data for 10, 15, 20 gauges over a large area, then I may be able to come up with what is called a depth area duration curve, DAD. Okay. So what is on the x-axis is the area covered by the rainfall rainfall event. Okay, and you can notice that it is an logarithmic scale. On the x-axis is the maximum average depth received over these areas. They are really going crazy today, my kids. Sorry. Okay. And then these different lines that you see, those are the envelopes for the for these different storms of different durations. Okay, so if I take a 1 hour storm, so this curve that is represented over here is a 1 hour storm. Okay, where's my mouse pointer? Okay, seem to have lost my mouse pointer. Ah, there it is. Okay. So I have a 1 hour storm, this is over here, a 6 hour storm, that's the curve representing how a 6 hour storm varies over the area and with the maximum average depth, and 12 hours and 18 hours and so on. Okay. So now what is the use of this kind of curves?
Or maybe we could predict any sort of floods in future.
You could predict floods in the future. No, not for predicting floods in the future. So as I said, if I want to let us say you're building a brand new city. Okay, and when you're designing the city, you want to design the storm sewerage network for the entire city, right? So now the roads along the city will have drains on both sides, which collect the rainwater and then take it away either to to a treatment plant, or they let it out to a nearby stream and so on. Okay, so now when I design these roads in a given city, in a given area, I need to know what kind of rainfall I'll receive so that I can design the drains on both sides of the road. The size of the drain depends on how much rainfall that region receives, right? If I receive more rainfall, I have to design a larger drain. If I receive less rainfall, I don't have to design a very big drain, right? So that kind of information becomes available through these kinds of curves that have been developed using a lot of rainfall gauges distributed over the entire area. Okay, so this is telling us that if you want to design a storm sewerage network, Okay, so you may look for a 24-hour duration. In 24 hours, what is the maximum amount of rainfall that this area receives? Okay, because my city may cover an area of, let us say, 100 square kilometers. Okay, or it may cover 200 square kilometers. I'm just giving an example. Okay, these days cities are pretty big, right? If you go to Chennai or Mumbai or Delhi, they cover hundreds of square kilometers. Okay, so if I have a 200 square kilometer city, okay, and within 24 hours, the maximum rainfall that has been received is, let us say, 200 millimeters, or which means 20 centimeters. Okay, then appropriately, if I design my drains to take the maximum rainfall event, any other rainfall event is fine, right? If I design the storm sewer drains such that they can accommodate the maximum rainfall event, then naturally they can also accommodate any rainfall event that's less than that, right? So you'll always design it for the maximum load, right? Whether it is a building or it's a storm drain, you will design it for the maximum event, correct? So that is the requirement, or that is the philosophy behind coming up with these kinds of curves, which allows you to estimate how much rainfall would be received in this kind of an area and over what duration. And depending on that, for different purposes, you'll come up with for a drain you may look at 24-hour duration. For a bridge you may look at some other factor. You may look at what is the probability of occurrence of these kinds of events and so on. Okay, so all of these pieces of information, the reason we require all of this is because it goes into some design. Okay, whether it is in terms of designing a bridge, whether this bridge can sustain these kinds of floods, right? You have to decide the height of the bridge depending on how high the water level in the river will go, right? For example, how high the water level in the river will go depends on how much discharge will flow through the stream. How much discharge will flow through the stream depends on how much rainfall you will receive over a given duration, right? For a bridge, of course, you'll have to look for longer durations. You may have to look for a storm that that happens continuously over maybe 48 hours or 72 hours or 96 hours and so on. Okay, under those situations, what is the maximum kind of flooding that may happen in the river, and what could be the maximum water level in the river? And if this is the water level in the river, then my bridge must be such that the bridge deck is above that, in order to, so that if the river is flowing over the bridge, then the bridge is no longer usable, right? So you have to ensure that the height of the bridge is such that even at the highest flood, the water level will be below the bridge deck, so that traffic can continue to go on the bridge. Okay, so those are all the kinds of applications for which you need this kind of hydrologic information to design these engineering structures, whether it is a bridge or it is a drain or a dam or so on. Okay, any questions? Okay, so we are out of time. We will meet on Tuesday, tomorrow. Okay, thank you. No questions, huh? All right. Okay.
Not yet.
Yeah, bye. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Bye.